Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. This is Time Twister once again with another episode of Time's Tactics. Now, this episode is going to be a little bit different from some of the other ones I've done because this one is... I am going to show you some game mechanics, but I'm not going to be showing you strategies so much as I am going to be using that as a background as I'm actually giving you my opinion on things. Because fair is fair, I did actually start doing Time's Tactics, not so much as a means to an end to just exploit achievements and whatnot, but because I, as an individual, really love computer games. And this one is actually one I really personally enjoy, but I hear get a lot of grief. This being Brutal Legend. Now, while I happen to be a fan of the heavy metal genre, which is exactly what this was basically a love letter to, I happen to know for a fact that Brutal Legend tends to get a lot of grief from people as a quote-unquote stealth RTS, in that people are... yes, sweeping music. In that they're usually generally expecting this to be a... let's turn that down a little bit for the sake of argument. They're expecting this to be one type of a game, and they end up with something else. I think that it has been given a very, very, very unfair reputation in that regard. How so? Well... the simple fact of the matter is you have to look at who designed this game. This was designed by Double Fine Productions. Now, who are they? Good question. Double Fine Productions is a group, an indie game developer, really, that for this particular game was actually funded by, yes, the evil group, EA. But... Double Fine had most of the executive control for this, which is the important thing. That's a little bit better. The bottom line is Double Fine was basically started by a group of guys led by a man named Tim Schafer. Tim Schafer was basically one of the main writers and programmers for LucasArts back when LucasArts actually made innovative games instead of simply leeching and whoring all of their Star Wars stuff before selling it to Disney. Yes, I'm insanely bitter about that. A couple of good examples of games that Schafer had and some of the people that he worked with have their very iconic thing on are things like Full Throttle, Grim Fandango. These are largely point-and-click adventures, I'll freely admit that, where it had little to no combat, but they basically represented my childhood. They had very clever writing, they had very ingenious humor, very, very, very clever games all around. They were ones that you really could tell that there was actually a lot of thought and effort put into plotline, story, and even when a game mechanic wasn't entirely thoroughly polished, you could tell that a lot of heart went into it. That was almost the indicative thing behind a LucasArts game back when Schafer and a lot of his associates were there. And then when Mr. Lucas or whoever at LucasArts was responsible for destroying that part of them, let them all go, it became kind of a soulless entity. But, you know, people of that strength go in different directions. Tim Schafer and some of his people founded Double Fine Productions. And they haven't made a lot of games because they're an indie developer now, so unless you can actually get a larger corporation to publish your game, not going to make much, but they're the ones that were responsible for Psychonauts, which is a game I absolutely adore. This one, which I actually really enjoy in its own right. and a more recent one that came out that I've heard mixed reviews about, not had a chance to play it yet, but known as The Cave. And they've also had their hands as secondary developers in other things. Now, the thing that I think is really fascinating about just about everything that Double Fine has ever gotten their hands on is that, much like with LucasArts productions, just about everything that develops in their games is story-oriented. It's utterly unique in that regard. You cannot pin down what's going to happen in a Double Fine game, usually, based on saying, oh, well, this is a first-person shooter, this is a RTS, this is going to be this is going to be that. They write a story, and then, based on whatever is relevant for development of that story, a game mechanic is added. And I love that formula, because it actually makes sense to me. It's not like they come up with a game mechanic and then just try to shoehorn some kind of really terrible generic plot in to explain why they came up with that, because there's all kinds of video games that have done that. It's like, you want a first-person shooter that has decent mechanics? There's hundreds of them. You want an RTS? There's dozens, if not hundreds of them. This one, it literally builds itself around the plot. Now, there are some spoilers here, so fair warning for anyone. I'll try to keep them to a minimum. This is the main character, the guy that's voiced by Jack Black, which, by the way, actually, excellent job by him, because rather than going over the top, which is usually what Jack Black's style is, this character is actually played low-key compared to everything else. You know, he freaks out, and there's whenever something totally metal happens, but the whole idea is he's a roadie. He always stays in the background, he makes other people look good, and he's not interested in taking the glory for himself. Never has been, never will be. But the idea is he was transported by means I won't explain for fear of ruining the intro, from where he existed in our present to the Age of Metal. A world that may or may not be in a different time, or may not be in an alternate dimension, where all the things that would represent rock and roll, cars, and other things of steel and titanium have literally been fused and ingrained into the world. And I'm not kidding. This game is worth buying just to see the overland map they created. It's beautiful. That's a volcano spewing liquid steel. This is just awesome. And the humans that live in the Age of Metal have basically been enslaved by a human warlord named General Lionwhite, which it is currently my job to deal with in this particular assignment, which I'm going to use to explain what we're eventually going to get to, and the demons that he works for. The reason the humans can't deal with it is because A, the secrets of the godlike titans that preceded them, they simply have lost, and they do not know how to read or regain them from the land. But for reasons that are plot-oriented, your character does. For that reason, and many others that are plot-oriented, you have the RPG elements, which is why you can whip around a sword and have multiple combos and things, which are the fighting routine combinations, which allow you to utilize your axe and your other axe, your guitar, which plays really cool licks in the modern world, but in the Age of Metal either electrifies things or blows them up. Now, to boot on that, you also have solos in this game. which are designed to deal with groups of enemies or attach status effects, which is specifically for the RTS element, but you can also use it in game. Face melters are designed to kill minor enemies or do major damage to more significant enemies. A battle cry basically rallies and improves the condition of a lot of your enemies. Your allies. This particular one allows you to harvest resources. This sets the rally position of your army. This allows you to instantly rally them to any point on the map, so on and so forth. I don't have all the solos at this point in the game, I'm only halfway through. But as you can see, there are a lot of strategy elements. Not enough that you would ever really consider this a real-time strategy game. Not by any stretch of the imagination. But enough that, yeah, this is not something like Fable or something. And that's where people give this game an insane amount of grief. I, on the other hand, first of all, think that's BS because, number one, it's just something that has an RTS element, which I think is done very well because it's enough to be a challenge, but not nearly enough that it completely consumes the game. It's just enough that it makes sense. The reason they need you in this game is because they, like I said before, they needed you to unlock the secrets of the Titans. The other reason is most of the humans are actually pretty fierce fighters. And they even have some leaders. The problem is they didn't know how to organize into a proper army and actually fight on the battlefield. What they needed was a general to act in between the leaders and their warriors. Basically what a roadie does for rock stars to the audience. So they literally needed a general. So yeah, they not only needed a fierce warrior, they needed a fierce warrior general to actually organize their armies, set them up on the battlefield, and lead them into combat strategically. In canon, that's the storyline. So I hate to break it to the people that always whine and cry and bitch about this, but they've got plenty of warriors. If all you did in this game was you were just a really mighty warrior, you wouldn't change shit. They need somebody that can lead an army. So there's a perfectly valid reason why RTS is in there. I didn't see it snuck in at all. For most of the game, they teach you all these moves and everything. Very early on, even before you actually have to start doing what are called stage battles, which are the main RTS element, you have to start working alongside other units. And they teach you how to actually give them orders, how to work together with them to maximize your potential. And it's very obvious if you play on normal or brutal difficulty that you are the strongest single warrior, but that still doesn't mean that you can't get surrounded by a group of enemies and die very easily. You have to work with groups of allies. So I think it works insanely well. When you face off against groups, you have to do this. So I don't know why this gets so much grief. And as far as, this being stealthed in, this game never claimed to be a RPG. It never claimed to be an FPS, and the demo even had, as far as I remember, you having to issue commands to individual units. It just didn't have any of the stage battles. So even in the initial demo stages, oh yeah, you knew what was coming. So I think a lot of people are insane crybabies about this. So the whole idea that if you don't like metal, this is a really derivative and bad game, bullshit. Utter bullshit. This game is just fine. It's just what happens if somebody took something like Fable, removed the leveling system entirely, and made it just basic upgrades and made it so that whatever upgrades you have, which by the way, there are upgrades, they're in the form of things you can actually find in the game. There are these bound serpents, which are statues found all over the game. For every 10 that you find, you get bonuses to either your max health, your regen rate, or the ability to regen your troops nearby. And for the record, yeah, that was also something that was indicative of Psychonauts. You had to search around and find special items to really stand a chance in that game, especially on the harder difficulty levels. In fact, you couldn't even proceed if you didn't find a certain percentage. Everything else that you find in the game doesn't actually improve your odds in that regard, but it does actually allow you to find extra songs and unlock other things like cover art and whatnot, and every single thing that you find or do in the game, including secondary missions, allows you to actually collect fire tributes. And fire tributes, which are given to you by the gods, allow you to go into motor forges, which are found in 11 places all over the overland map, which you can see right here. These are motor forges. And all you have to do is drive into one, and you can upgrade your main weapons, buy special moves, and usually any time something is actually made available to you, it actually will give you a heads up that it is there. And you access motor forges and virtually all the secrets in the game, except of course the dragons, by playing a solo which is currently red lighted for me, but it's basically one of the first ones you receive. It's called the Relic Razor. Now, you may be wondering how solos work. Actually very simple. The 1, 2, and 3 keys by default on the PC, or I believe it's some of the buttons on the controller on the consoles, like the the A, X, Y buttons, whatever have you. You basically just have to hit them in the order in which they proceed. It usually takes about 1 to 2 seconds. As long as you hit the majority of them, the solo works. The more you successfully hit, the more effective it is. It's not really that hard. The idea is just that if you're in combat or under fire, you're under stress, you might screw it up. Take the battle cry. Oh, it's awesome.
Like the greatest thing that ever happened to you, right?
You're damn right it is, Eddie Riggs. Okay, now that I've explained some of this stuff, it's about time I actually showed you what a battle looked like. Now, since I've already been talking for quite some time, I'm going to end this part, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you what the battle itself looks like, so you guys can get a feel for it. Because this is as decent as one of the story battles as you're going to get, because this is the first one where they literally really don't give you any hints or tips. You're basically just left to your own devices, so I am basically free without playing on a multiplayer map to explain everything to you. Alright, see you in the next one. Time out.